What happens when a ruthless billionaire CEO with a heart of ice meets an intern who's fighting for her brother's life? This emotionally charged story will leave you breathless. All right, Dignity Stories Z Crew, settle in. This one's got emotions, secrets, and a twist that will leave you breathless. The 27th floor of the Meridian Tower felt like a glass cage suspended between heaven and hell, where the city's most ruthless predators wore designer suits and devoured dreams for breakfast. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each droplet catching the harsh fluorescent light that made everyone look like corpses under expensive makeup. Ethan Fiser stood in his corner office, watching the storm rage outside while nursing his third espresso of the morning. At 34, he'd built an empire from the ashes of his father's failed company. Each success a small revenge against the man who'd abandoned him and his mother when the money ran out. The taste of victory had long since turned bitter in his mouth, but it was the only flavor he knew how to savor. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Fiser, your new intern is here?" He didn't turn around. "Send her away. I don't have time for babysitting trust fund princesses." "Sir, she's already been processed through HR," the board insisted. "The board can kiss my—" The office door burst open without a knock, and Ethan spun around, his words dying in his throat. The woman standing in his doorway looked like she'd been wrestling with a hurricane and lost. Her dark hair hung in damp tendrils around her face, mascara smudged beneath eyes that burned with defiance rather than apology. Her cheap blazer was wrinkled. One heel was missing. There was a small tear in her skirt that she hadn't bothered to hide. "Are you going to fire me before I even start?" she asked, her voice rough with exhaustion and something else he couldn't. "Name, because honestly, it would save us both some time." Ethan found himself studying her face, noting the way her jaw clenched when she was nervous, the tiny scar above her left eyebrow, the way she held herself like she was ready to fight or flee at any moment. She wasn't beautiful in the polished, artificial way of the women who usually graced his office. She was something more dangerous than beautiful. She was real. "You're late," he said finally, settling behind his desk like a king claiming his throne. Traffic was murder. Literally. There was a 3-car pileup on 5th, and I had to run the last 6 blocks. She gestured to her disheveled appearance, hence the drowned rat aesthetic I'm currently sporting. Despite himself, Ethan felt his lips twitch. Most people would have called. My phone died somewhere between the subway breaking down and a taxi driver who apparently learned to drive from bumper cars. She stepped closer, and he caught a whiff of rain and something floral. "Underneath, look. Mr. Fiser, I need this internship. Not want it, need it. So if you're going to throw me out, just do it quickly so I can start applying to other places before lunch." The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. In his world, everyone wore masks, spoke in careful corporate doublespeak, and measured every word for maximum advantage. This woman stood before him, stripped of pretense, offering her desperation like a gift. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already knew from the file on his desk. "Alisa Martin." "And why do you need this internship so badly, Alisa Martin?" Something flickered across her face, a shadow of pain quickly suppressed. "That's not really your concern, is it? You just need to know I'll work harder than anyone else you've ever hired. Everyone says that. Everyone else is lying." She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of rain against glass and the distant hum of the city below. Ethan had built his success on reading people, on finding their weaknesses and exploiting them. But looking at Alisa Martin, he saw something he'd forgotten existed. He saw someone who had nothing left to lose. "You'll work directly under me," he heard himself say, the words surprising him as much as they did her. 12-hour days minimum. No holidays, no sick days, no excuses. I don't tolerate failure, tardiness, or stupidity. Are we clear? Relief flooded her features so completely that it was almost painful to watch. "Crystal. Good. Sarah will show you to your desk. We start with the Morrison account in 20 minutes. She nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mr. Fiser, thank you." The words were simple, but they hit him with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had thanked him for anything other than money or power? When was the last time gratitude hadn't come with strings attached? "Don't thank me yet," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "You have no idea what you've just signed up for." After she left, Ethan stood alone in his glass cage, watching her reflection disappear into the maze of cubicles beyond. Something had shifted in the carefully ordered world he'd built around himself. Some small crack in the foundation that he couldn't quite identify. Outside, the storm raged on, but for the first time in years, Ethan Fiser found himself wondering if he was standing on the right side of the glass. 3 weeks later, Ethan discovered that Alisa Martin was either the most dedicated intern in corporate history or completely insane. She arrived before dawn and left well past midnight, her desk lamp a solitary beacon in the empty office. Reports were flawless, her insights sharp enough to cut, and her work ethic made his most ambitious employees look lazy by comparison. It was driving him absolutely mad. "The Yamamoto deal is structured all wrong," she said, standing in his office. At 11 p.m., with coffee-stained papers and eyes that blazed with exhaustion and determination, "They're trying to bury the liability clauses in subsection 14. But if we restructure the payment schedule, most people would have gone home hours ago," Ethan interrupted, not looking up from his own work. "Most people don't have medical bills that could fund a small country." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Ethan's head snapped up. For a moment, her carefully constructed mask cracked, and he glimpsed something raw and desperate underneath. "Medical bills?" Lisa's face went pale. "I didn't mean to say that, but you did." She turned toward the window, her reflection ghostly against the city lights. "My brother is dying, acute lymphocytic leukemia. The experimental treatments aren't covered by insurance, and we've already mortgaged everything we own twice over." The confession hung in the air, between them like a live wire. Ethan had spent so long surrounded by people who wanted things from him that he'd forgotten what it felt like to witness genuine vulnerability. "How old is he?" Ethan found himself asking. 16. Her voice cracked. "You should be worried about prom dates and college applications, not whether he'll live to see his next birthday." Something twisted in Ethan's chest, a pain he hadn't felt since his own father's betrayal. He stood and moved to the window beside her, close enough to smell her shampoo and feel the tension radiating from her body. "Why didn't you mention this in your interview?" "'Cause I didn't want pity. I wanted a job." She turned to face him, and the raw honesty in her eyes made his breath catch. "I've watched my family destroy themselves trying to save Danny. My parents sold their house, emptied their retirement accounts, took out loans they'll never be able to repay. I won't let him die because we couldn't afford to keep him alive." The fierce protectiveness in her voice reminded Ethan of his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after his father left. But where his mother had eventually been, broken by the weight of it all, Alisa seemed to burn brighter under the pressure. "The Yamamoto restructure," he said suddenly. "If it works, there's a performance bonus. 50,000. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Fiser, I can't accept you'll earn it." He moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "But I have conditions, such as you stop lying to me." His voice dropped too barely above a whisper. "About why you're really here, about what you're willing to do to save your brother, about the fact that you haven't slept more than 3 hours a night since you started working here." "How did you?" "Because I recognize the signs. I live them." He reached out. Without thinking, his fingers brushing the dark circles under her eyes. "You can't save him if you kill yourself in the process." The touch was electric, sending shockwaves through both of them. Alisa stepped back as if burned, but not before Ethan caught the way her breath hitched, the way her pupils dilated in the dim office light. "This is inappropriate," she whispered. "Probably. You're my boss. I'm aware. I need this job." "I know." But neither of them moved away. The space between them hummed with tension and unspoken possibilities, dangerous and intoxicating as expensive wine. "The Morrison account presentation is tomorrow," Alisa said finally, her voice unsteady. "I should go home and practice stay." The word escaped before he could stop it. "I mean, we should go over the presentation together, make sure it's perfect." She studied his face in the city light filtering through the windows. "Is that what we'd be doing? Going over presentations?" The question hung between them like a challenge and a confession. Ethan felt something shifting inside him, some carefully constructed wall beginning to crumble. "I don't know," he admitted, and the honesty tasted foreign on his tongue. Before either of them could say another word, his phone rang, shattering the moment. The caller ID made his blood run cold. "I have to take this," he said, his voice suddenly distant and professional. As he answered the call, Alisa gathered her papers and headed for the door. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Mr. Fiser?" she said softly. "Yes, whatever just happened, Hyru can't let it happen again." She left before he could respond, but her words echoed in his empty office long after she was gone. On the phone, his private investigator's voice droned on about asset reports and background checks. But Ethan wasn't listening. His mind was focused on the woman who'd just walked out of his office and the dangerous game they'd started playing, without meaning to, because despite her words, despite every logical reason why pursuing her was wrong, Ethan Fiser found himself hoping she was lying about that too. The Morrison presentation was flawless. Lisa's restructuring plan saved the company $12 million and earned her the kind of recognition that usually took years to achieve. But as Ethan watched her accept congratulations from the board members, all he could think about was the way she'd looked at him in his office 3 nights ago. Vulnerable and fierce and beautiful in her honesty. He was falling for her, and it was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to him. "Impressive work, Miss Martin," board member Harrison Wheeler said, his hand lingering too long on Alisa's shoulder. "Perhaps we could discuss your future. Over dinner sometime?" Ethan's jaw clenched. Miss Martin's schedule is fully booked for the foreseeable future. Wheeler raised an eyebrow at the possessive edge in Ethan's voice, but said nothing. After the room cleared, Alisa approached Ethan's desk, where he sat reviewing contracts with unnecessary intensity. "That was out of line," she said quietly. "Wheeler is married with 3 kids. I can handle myself." "I know you can." He finally looked up, and the heat in his eyes made her stomach flutter traitorously. That doesn't mean I have to like watching other men try to proposition you." "Ethan," she caught herself using his first name and blushed. "Mr. Fiser, we agreed. You agreed. I never said anything." Before she could respond, his assistant knocked on the open door. "Mr. Fiser, your 4 o'clock is here." Finn frowned. "I don't have a 4 o'clock. "Victoria Ashford from Ashford Consulting. She says it's urgent." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. Victoria Ashford. The woman who'd once promised to love him forever before she'd stolen his designs and sold them to his biggest competitor 5 years ago. The woman who'd taught him that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Send her in," he said, his voice suddenly cold as winter steel. Victoria entered like she owned the place, her platinum hair perfectly styled, her red suit impeccable and expensive. She was beautiful in the way of a poisonous flower, all surface perfection, hiding deadly thorns beneath. "Hello, Ethan," she purred, her eyes sliding dismissively over Alisa. "You look well? What do you want, Victoria? Can't a girl visit an old friend?" She settled into the chair across from his desk like a queen claiming her throne. "Though, I suppose we were more than friends, weren't we?" Alisa felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. She started to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "Stay," he said, not taking his eyes off Victoria. "Whatever she has to say, she can say it in front of my associate." Victoria's smile sharpened. "Associate? How quaint. I heard you were training." "Another little protege." The word protege came out like an insult, heavy with implication. Alisa felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her ground. "I'm here about the Yamamoto deal," Victoria continued, pulling out a tablet and sliding it across the desk. "Specifically about the fact that your little intern here has been feeding information to Yamamoto's competitors." The world stopped, spinning. Ethan stared at the screen, which showed bank records, wire transfers, and email correspondence. All in Alisa's name, all damning. "That's impossible," Alisa breathed. But even as she said it, she could see the doubt creeping into Ethan's eyes. $50,000 deposited into your account last week," Victoria said with false sympathy. "The same day you submitted your restructuring proposal. Funny timing, don't you think?" Ethan's face had gone completely blank. The mask he wore. In business negotiations, sliding into place, Alisa? I don't know what this is, but it's not real. Lisa's voice was shaking now. Ethan, you have to believe me. I would never. The money's real, Victoria interrupted. As are the emails offering to sell insider information. Really, Ethan? I thought you'd learn to be more careful after what happened between us. The comparison was a knife twisted in, an old wound. Ethan stood slowly, his movements controlled and predatory. Get out, he said to Victoria, his voice deadly quiet. I'm trying to help you get out before I have security throw you out. Victoria gathered her things with theatrical disappointment. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Ethan, but you needed to know. She paused at the door, looking back at Alisa with mock pity. Though I suppose desperation makes people do terrible things. Medical bills can be so expensive. After she left, the silence in the office was deafening. Ethan stood with his back to Alisa, staring out at the city beyond the glass. Ethan, please, Alisa whispered. You know me. You know I wouldn't do. This do I. He turned around, and the stranger looking back at her was colder than winter. You've been here 3 weeks? What do I really know about you besides what you've chosen to tell me? You know I'm fighting for my brother's life. You know I'd do anything to save him, but not this. Never this. $50,000 would go a long way toward those medical bills. The accusation hit her like a slap. You bastard. There it is, he said with bitter satisfaction. The truth finally comes out. Tears burned behind Alisa's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The truth is that I'm in love with you, you cold-hearted son of a bitch. The truth is that I've been fighting feelings for you that could destroy everything I've worked for. The truth is that I trusted you when I've never trusted anyone in my life. The confession hung between them like a blade. Ethan's carefully constructed composure cracked for just a moment, and she saw something raw and yearning in his eyes. Then the mask slammed back into place. Clean out your desk, he said. Security will escort you out. Ethan, it's Mr. Fiser. And this conversation is over. Alisa stood there for a long moment, memorizing his face, trying to reconcile the man who touched her so gently 3 nights ago with the stranger dismissing her now. I hope someday you realize what you're throwing away, she said quietly, and I hope it destroys you the way it's destroying me. She walked out of his office and his life, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the echo of words that cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. Ethan stood alone in his glass cage, surrounded by the empire he'd built on mistrust and carefully calculated cruelty. He told himself he'd done the right thing, made the smart choice, protected himself from another Victoria. But as he watched, Alisa's reflection disappear into the elevator. Something inside his chest cracked open, and for the first time in 5 years, Ethan Fiser wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. 2 weeks after Alisa left, Ethan's carefully ordered world began to crumble. It started with small things: coffee that tasted like ash, reports that he read 3 times without comprehending a single word. Nights when he stood at his office, windows staring at the city below, searching for a familiar figure among the anonymous crowds. He told himself it was guilt. Nothing more. Then Marcus Chen, his head of security, knocked on his door at midnight on a Thursday, his usually calm demeanor shattered by barely contained rage. We found something, Marcus said, dropping a thick file on Ethan's desk. About the Martin situation. Ethan's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. What kind of something? The kind that makes me want to find Victoria Ashford and throw her off the nearest rooftop. The file contained bank records, digital forensics reports, and surveillance footage. As Ethan read through the evidence, his hands began to shake. The money trail was elaborate, sophisticated, and completely fabricated. Emails had been sent from a spoofed account using Alisa's name. The bank account was real, but it had been opened using stolen identity documents. Most damning of all, the surveillance footage showed Victoria Ashford leaving a computer cafe downtown at the exact time the fabricated emails were sent. She played us, Marcus said grimly. All of us, but especially you. Ethan's vision blurred. With rage so pure, it felt like drowning. How long did you know? I started investigating the day after Martin left. Something felt wrong about the whole thing, but I needed proof before I came to you. 2 weeks, Ethan whispered. She's been gone for 2 weeks, boss. Find her. The words came out like shards of broken glass. Find Alisa. Now. But Marcus was already shaking his head. I've been trying. She's vanished. No forwarding address, phone disconnected, social media accounts deleted. Left it's like she doesn't want to be found. The weight of what he'd done crashed over Ethan like a tsunami. He'd taken the one genuine thing in his life and destroyed it with his own hands. Alisa had confessed she loved him, and he'd responded by calling security to escort her out like a common criminal, sir. Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you all right? Ethan wasn't all right?
Yeah.
He might never be all right. Again, but he had to find her, had to make this right somehow. I need you to expand the search, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Check hospitals, medical centers. Mentioned her brother was sick. 3 days later, Marcus found the lead they needed. Daniel Martin, age 16, was a patient at St. Margaret's Hospital. Currently undergoing experimental treatment for acute lymphocytic leukemia. The bills were staggering, the prognosis uncertain, and the family had exhausted every legal avenue. For funding, Ethan found Alisa in the hospital's chapel at 2 a.m, praying to a god who seemed to have forgotten her family existed. She looked fragile in the harsh fluorescent light, her shoulders curved inward, as if protecting herself from another blow. Alisa. She turned, and the look on her face nearly brought him to his knees. It wasn't anger or hurt or even surprise. It was nothing at all. The careful blankness of someone who'd been broken one too many times. What are you doing here? Her voice was steady, emotionless. I know the truth. He sat beside her on the hard wooden pew, noting the way she tensed at his proximity. About Victoria, about the setup, about everything. I'm sorry. She turned back to the altar. Sorry doesn't pay for chemotherapy. The words hit him like a physical blow. How is he dying? The single word contained a universe of pain. The experimental treatment isn't working. They're giving him 2 weeks, maybe 3. Ethan closed his eyes, the guilt threatening to suffocate him. While he'd been nursing his wounded pride, her brother had been slipping away. Let me help, he said quietly. No, Alisa, no. She stood abruptly, her composure cracking. You don't get to waltz in here with your guilt and your money and think that fixes anything. You looked me in the eye and chose to believe I was capable of betraying you. That I was capable of betraying everything I said I felt for you. I was wrong. Yes, you were. But being wrong isn't the same as being sorry, and being sorry isn't the same as being forgiven. She started to walk away, but Ethan caught her arm. Wait, please. Let go of me. Not until you listen. I listened for 3 weeks while I worked for you. I listened when you told me about your father leaving, about your mother working herself to death to keep you fed. I listened when you talked about trust being a luxury you couldn't afford. Her voice rose with each word. And then when it mattered, when someone you barely trusted told you lies about someone you claimed to know, you chose to believe the stranger over me. The truth of her words flayed him alive. You're right. Of course I'm right. The question is, why are you here? Guilty conscience? Bad publicity? Or did you just realize that firing your best intern was bad for business because I love you? The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and desperate and completely honest. Alisa went very still. What did you say? I love you. He stood, closing the distance between them. I've been in love with you since that first day when you stood in my office looking like you'd been through hell and refused to apologize for it. I love the way you throw yourself into everything you do, the way you fight for the people you care about, the way you never back down, even when the whole world is against you. Tears were streaming down her face now. Ethan, I love that you called me a cold-hearted son of a bitch and meant every word of it. I love that you're brave enough to love people even when they don't deserve it. His voice broke. I love you, and I destroyed us because I was too much of a coward to trust what we had. She was sobbing openly now, her careful composure completely shattered. It's too late. It doesn't have to be. Yes, it does. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Even if I could forgive you, even if we could somehow make this work, Danny is going to die. And when he does, I'm going to fall apart in ways that will destroy both of us. You can't love someone who's that broken. Try me, he said simply. The chapel fell silent, except for the sound of her crying. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. But inside this sacred space, two damaged souls faced the possibility of redemption or final destruction. The treatment in Switzerland, Alisa said finally, her voice barely audible. There's a clinic that specializes in cases like Danny's. But it costs more money than my family will make in 10 lifetimes. Done. Ethan, you don't understand. I don't care what it costs. He took her hands in his, noting how cold they were. I'll liquidate assets if I have to, whatever it takes. She stared at him through her tears. Why would you do that? Because you love him, and I love you. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Because sometimes the only way to save someone is to be willing to sacrifice everything for them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Alisa pulled one hand free and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of exhaustion and regret that marked his features. If we do this, she said quietly, if I let you back in, you have to promise me something, anything. It gets bad when I'm falling apart and pushing you away and being impossible to love. You don't get to give up on me. You don't get to decide I'm too damaged to save. I promise, even if it destroys you. Ethan thought of all the ways he'd built walls around his heart, all the careful defenses he'd constructed to keep people out. Then he thought of Alisa Martin, who'd walked into his life like a hurricane and shown him what it meant to be, truly. Alive, especially then, he said, and meant it with every broken piece of his soul. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the gleaming halls of the Zurich clinic, watching Alisa laugh with her brother over a chess game. Danny's color had returned, his eyes bright with the kind of hope that only comes from cheating death and winning. The experimental treatment was working beyond everyone's wildest expectations. But the past 6 months had nearly broken them both. Alisa had kept her word about falling apart. There were nights when she screamed at him until her voice gave out, days when she wouldn't speak to him at all, weeks when the terror of potentially losing Danny made her lash out at everyone who tried to help. Ethan had absorbed it all, had held her when she collapsed from exhaustion, had fought with doctors when they suggested giving up, had liquidated half his assets without a single regret. You know, Danny said, moving his queen across the board. I used to think my sister was crazy for working so hard. Watching you two fight for me made me understand something about love I never got before. Alisa looked up from the game, her eyes finding Ethan's across the room. What's that? That real love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible to win. Danny's words hung in the air like a benediction. Through the window, snow fell softly over the Swiss Alps, and for the first time in months, the world felt peaceful. I have something for you, Ethan said to Alisa later that evening as they walked through the quiet streets of Zurich. The city sparkled with Christmas lights, and their breath formed small clouds in the cold air. If it's another ridiculously expensive medical consultation, it's not. He stopped walking and pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. It's this. Alisa's eyes widened. Ethan, I know we've been through hell, he said, his words visible in the frosty air.
Ow.
I know I broke your trust and nearly destroyed us both. I know we're not perfect, and I know loving me isn't easy. Ethan, but I also know that you're the strongest person I've ever met. You saved your brother's life through sheer force of will. You forgave me when I didn't deserve it. You loved me even when I was too broken to love myself. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the streetlight like captured starlight. Marry me. Not because we're perfect, but because we're perfect for each other. Alisa stared at the ring, then at his face, her own eyes. Bright with unshed tears. You're insane. Probably. We've been together 6 months, and most of that time I was completely unhinged. I fell in love with you when you were unhinged. It's one of your most attractive qualities. Despite herself, she laughed. You realize that if I say yes, you're signing up for a lifetime of medical anxiety, family drama, and a woman who talks too much when she's nervous? I'm counting on it. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the golden glow of the street lamps. "Text me again in a year," she said finally. "When we've survived normal life together, not just crisis mode. When we know this is real and not just trauma bonding and proximity." Disappointment flashed across his features, but he nodded. "All right. But ask me again with this ring," she added, closing the box and pressing it back into his hands, "because the answer's going to be yes." The smile that spread across his face was brighter than all the Christmas lights in Zurich. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her there in the snow, tasting possibility and promise on her lips. "Right. I love you, Alisa Martin," he whispered against her mouth. "I love you too, you impossible man." 1 year later, Ethan proposed again on the same street corner in Zurich where they'd stood that snowy December night. Danny was there as their witness, healthy and preparing for college. His laugh echoing off the cobblestones as Alisa said yes before Ethan could even get the question out. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony overlooking the Hudson River, with both their families in attendance and Marcus Chen serving as best man. Alisa wore her grandmother's dress and carried white roses, and when she walked down the aisle, Ethan knew he was looking at his salvation. Victoria Ashford was serving 18 months in federal prison for corporate espionage and identity theft. The Yamamoto deal had made Fiser Corp one of the most successful firms on the East Coast. Danny graduated valedictorian of his high school class and was accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. But standing at the altar, watching Alisa approach, Ethan realized that none of those victories mattered compared to this moment. She'd taught him that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who inspired you to complete yourself. "You clean up nice," she whispered as she took his hands. "You're not so bad yourself." The minister began the ceremony, but Ethan barely heard the words. He was too busy memorizing the way the afternoon light caught in Alisa's hair, the way her eyes sparkled with joy and mischief, the way she squeezed his hands when she promised to love him for better or worse. In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. When they were pronounced husband and wife, when he kissed her to the sound of applause and Danny's whooping cheers, Ethan felt something inside his chest expand and soar. For 36 years, he'd built his life on careful calculations and strategic moves. But loving Alisa Martin had taught him the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best things in life were the ones you couldn't plan for, couldn't control, and couldn't protect yourself from. They were the ones that crashed into your carefully ordered world like a hurricane and changed everything. Years later, when people asked Ethan Fiser how he'd built his empire, he would tell them about market analysis and strategic planning, about taking calculated risks and trusting his instincts. Late at night, when he held his wife in their bed and listened to her breathing in the darkness, he knew the truth. His real success hadn't come from conquering boardrooms or closing deals. It had come from learning to open his heart to a woman who'd stumbled into his elevator on a rainy morning and taught him that the strongest foundations weren't built on stone and steel, but on trust and forgiveness, and the kind of love that chose to fight for each other every single day. Lisa stirred in his arms, mumbling something about quarterly reports in her sleep. Even in unconsciousness, she was magnificent. Even dreaming, she was changing his world. Whispered into the quiet night, answering a question she hadn't asked, but that lived in every breath they shared. Outside their window, the city hummed with 8 million stories of heartbreak and hope, loss and redemption. People searching for something real in a world that often felt artificial. But inside their home, Ethan and Alisa had found what everyone was looking for. They had found each other. Asterisk comment below. Which city are you watching from? What's your favorite billionaire romance trope? Subscribe for more emotionally intense romance stories that'll make you believe in love again. If this story gave you all the feels, and share with someone who loves a good redemption arc. Now, the end.